Chapter 34, kind of an intro here. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." so that's kind of the gist of what happened. You probably recall the rest of the story. This is probably one of the most violent chapters in the Bible in terms of what happened. You'll recall that Reuben and Simeon were very upset about this. And so they made an agreement, a pact. Well, in fact, Hamor, the father, offered two things. He said, let's make an agreement. Let's intermarry with each other, and let's have an economic agreement. So they did those things even back then. Well, of course, intermarriage was not really a kosher thing. No pun intended for the Jewish people. What Jewish people we had back then, not very many. But, they had all gone back to Mesopotamia to get wives from their clan up there because God told them, don't marry the Canaanite women down in Canaan where they were living. So intermarriage was not a good plan for Hamor to put up there. But they kind of played along with it. They said, okay, well, let's tell you what, if we're going to do this, then you guys are going to have to get circumcised like we are. And so they asked them to do that. It's amazing to me that they did. All the guys in the town agreed to get circumcised so that he could have Dinah as his wife. And of course, along a few days into it there, when they were hurting pretty bad, they came in and just slaughtered them all. Pretty much Reuben and Simeon did. So, some interesting things about this story. Why do you think this story is even in the Bible? And that's a really bizarre kind of incident. And it's kind of stuck here between, Jacob wrestling with God and meeting Esau. And then what we're coming up on is the renaming and blessing of Jacob. Why do we have this story just kind of stuck in here? What do you think its purpose might have been? What purpose does this story serve? Any ideas? You can come up with most anything because people that have thought about this have come up with all kinds of crazy ideas. Nothing's going to be any crazier, trust me. Does anybody have an idea? Come in, Brother Moore.
I'm here.
All right. We're talking about, what's her name? Dinah. Dinah. No ideas? Okay, well, I'll tell you what I found. Some things that have been proposed is that this may be just a story to discourage racial assimilation. Again, they've been told by God not to marry the Canaanites, right? So maybe the whole point of this story is just to remind them that we aren't supposed to do that. We're supposed to just marry Jews, and not marry outside of our religious family. So that's one thought. Another thought is that this may explain why Simeon and Reuben, even though they are the first two of the sons, are kind of neglected in the rest of the history of Judah. All the kings, and ultimately Jesus, comes through who? Judah, the fourth born son, not the first, second, or third. So this may explain why they kind of got skipped over and it wound up being Judah. Maybe that's a potential explanation. And then there's this whole idea of what really went on here. I think, did I read this, that verb? Yeah, I'm reading ESV here. Verse 2 says, and when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. Now, what does that sound like? That sounds like rape, doesn't it? So there's a big controversy as to whether this is rape or not. But seized is not a very good translation there. The word is lakach, And it basically means he took her, and it's take in the sense of take a wife. So, and then we see later that he loved her and he wanted to marry her. So there's two schools of thought. Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
There's two schools of thought on this. One school of thought says that, one school of thought kind of puts a little bit of the blame on Dinah because she's out, what was it said? She went out to seek the women of the land. Some people think she was actually looking for her husband. She was trying to get away. She's the daughter of Leah. Leah was not a favored wife, right? So you can imagine that her child was probably even less favored than Leah was. So one school of thought says, well, maybe she was just kind of, I'm out of here. I'm going to go find me somebody out there somewhere. And she uses this excuse for going out to see the women of the land. And then she sees Shechem, and they hook up, and so forth and so on. Now, the other side of the story suggests that it really is a rape, that he took her by force, and that's where Reuben and Simeon are coming from. They see it that way, certainly, which is why they come back with this plan to murder all of the Shechemites, I guess they would be called, Hittites, that are there. So, you've got two different sides of the story. We don't really know which one is actually right or not. But obviously what happened is what happened. And we have it for a purpose. So what am I missing here? One other interesting thing.
Well, what dismays so much is the difference in God's plan with salvation and everything versus today's plan. And how he communicated,
Right.
And I mean, what I have never understood, him talking to people directly. This, everybody else might think this is crazy. I should know this, but I'm asking you this question: was he talking to them then, like you and I are talking to each other today, or was this? And like I know a lot of times, when Paul was on the way to Damascus, and God struck him down,
Heard the voice, yeah.
and he talked to him, but the guy, his soldiers and everything that was with him, it sounded like a thundering, or something. They didn't pick up.
They didn't hear it.
So I mean, now that's the difference. When I'm trying to ask you, I mean, it's like I know you talked to Moses when he was in the bush, playing bush,
So the answer is yes, all of the above. He did all of that. I mean, sometimes there were dreams, and spoke to them through dreams. Other times, though,
how could we say that he spoke to us today? Then I mean, he speaks to us through his word.
Yeah, he speaks to us primarily through the word.
Could he speak to you through dreams?
As far as I'm concerned, he can do anything he wants to do.
But if I were to say,
I haven't had him speak to me personally.
I would say he spoke to me last night,
Yeah.
I mean, that wouldn't be something out of our ordinary way.
I don't have any problem with him still doing that if he wants to, but there's less need for that now than there was back then, because we have this, and we know a lot of that already. So there's really probably not a whole lot of pressing need for him to come to me in person and talk. But I think he could if he wanted to or needed to.
The way the things happen, all relatives and stuff, marrying Canaanite women, and stuff.
Right.
But it's a little confusing to me.
Oh, it is. It is. And you do see kind of all things of the spectrum. The appearances where he actually comes physically and speaks face to face, so to speak, are theologically, that's called a theophany, where God appears and talks to you. And we see that happening with the patriarchs, with Abraham, with Jacob, Isaac. We don't see that happening with many other people, but we do see a lot with dreams and that sort of thing, and even later on in the Old Testament. Okay?
Why does he say, maybe you're going to get to this in verse verse 23, Hamor and Shechem are saying, won't their livestock, their property, and all their animals become ours? Why are they saying that? The dowry or something? Are they expecting a dowry?
I think so. Because if they were to get married, you know, there would generally be a bride price to be paid, and that would be part of the bride price, most likely. But also, he's really proposing kind of one of these, it's globalism in its earliest stages here, the economic treaty, where they kind of share everything economically too. So that was part of that proposal, besides the intermarriage.
So are you saying it maybe wasn't a kidnapping and rape? Maybe it was.
Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was. It's not really clear.
Call it alimony.
But if you have a text that says "sees" like mine does, that's not a really good translation. The real word there is "matak," which is "took," which is used like you take a wife. So it may or may not have been. Now, clearly, Reuben and Simeon thought it was. You know, if they thought this was just, oh, they're just boyfriend, girlfriend kind of thing, you know, they wouldn't have been so upset. So that, you know, they clearly viewed it that way. And that may give you something to
Where are
it.
you finding Reuben's name?
Um,
I'm finding Simeon. And
I'm sorry,
Levi.
it's Simeon and Levi, I'm sorry. I
Okay.
backed up one.
Looking.
I backed up one brother. It's Simeon and Levi, you're correct. The last thing I want to say about this was verse 17. This is kind of interesting too, because was it verse 17? But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we'll take our daughter and we will be gone. The word there is actually Yeldah, which is the feminine form of Yeled, which means a child or girl. So Dinah was not like a grown woman here. She may have been a teen. And of course, in their culture, you know, when you were 12, you were pretty much marriageable in their culture. So, but she wasn't like a grown woman that this happened to. She's a girl, basically. Okay. And so there's a couple nice pictures there. Here's the slaughter where they're killing them all. In this one, I forget who this one is. So let's go into chapter 35. And this is a number of things going on here where God blesses and renames Jacob. He's already done that once. We did that last week. He's going to rename him again this week, the same name. But we'll just read an intro to this in 35. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise, go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to the Lord, who answers me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. Now Bethel, you will recall, is the place where when Jacob was fleeing from Esau and going to find Rebekah, his wife, he stopped there, and that's where he saw the stairway to heaven, Led Zeppelin, and all that. Right? And he named it the place of God, the house of God, Bethel. Beth means house in Hebrew.
Why do you think the foreign gods and the earrings are linked together?
Well, the earrings could also be associated with some form of idolatry. I mean, it's just that was a practice of the Canaanite people that they had kind of picked up.
So I shouldn't be wearing earrings.
That's right. I think our culture is a little bit different now. But we talked last week, a little bit about Rachel and her foreign gods. When she kind of hid them under the saddle and sat on and said, "I can't get up because I'm having a period." So, but it appears here that more than Rachel had foreign gods. And again, they were from Mesopotamia. That was pretty common in ancient Near Eastern culture back then. They did a lot of that. In fact, today, if you go to India, the Hindus have household gods. Very similar sort of thing. So Jacob is told to go back to Bethel, and this kind of refers back to chapter 28, verse 19, If you want to look at that sometime, that's when he was there before, and God said, you know, I'm going to watch over you, take care of you, and that sort of thing. He told them to put away the foreign gods and to purify themselves. The last chapter was a chapter of defilement, so it's kind of appropriate now that we have a chapter of purification, right? So they're kind of cleaning up their act a little bit to worship God at Bethel. It's interesting that I didn't read this far, but further into the text, it talks about, this is in verse 5, a terror from God fell on the cities around them such that nobody attacked them. You know, they got Canaanites all around them, and they're not a huge number of people here, so they could have easily been attacked and all killed, but this terror from God prevented anyone else from attacking them. And then we have Jacob's name being changed to Israel again, as we saw it was last week. So that's kind of a repetition there. Oh, let's see what we else have here. Still adjusting these glasses.
I have a question about El Bethel.
El Bethel?
Isn't Bethel means, the El means God?
El means God.
Right, so what's Beth?
Beth or Beit means house.
House of God.
So Bethel means house of God. El Bethel means God, house of God. That's a little redundant. God, house of God.
God, house of God.
Right. God, house of God. Yeah. It's a little redundant. It is.
Okay.
Okay. So clearly Simeon and Levi thought that this was oh, I'm sorry. We're back on the other one. I'm down there. I had written it on the wrong slide here. So here's a little idea of what these things look like. These earrings that they had. Do you have some like these? Let's see. This was excavated from Megiddo, which is a little bit north of Judah, around, and they date to the 1100s. Which 1100 is probably a little bit later than we're probably more like 1500 or so. We can see where we are today, but a little bit later. But still the same kind of stuff. It's probably very similar to what they gave up. And then the latter part of this chapter, we have the account of both Rachel's and Isaac's deaths. And this map gives you a little bit of perspective as to where these things occurred. So it's interesting, Isaac is the first patriarch that was actually born, lived, and died in the Promised Land. You know, Abraham didn't. And Jacob coming later, Jacob winds up dying in Egypt. So it's interesting that Isaac is really the only one of the three that spent his whole life pretty much in the Promised Land. So as you recall, I think we talked about this last week. We'll take Rachel first. As she was dying, she was giving birth to Benjamin, and she died giving birth to him. And Benjamin had two names. She wanted to name him Ben-Ami, which basically means the son of my vigor, or the son of my strength, that she was, having vigorous childbirth. But Jacob came behind her and said, no, I want him to be named Benjamin, which means more like the son of my right hand, or the son of the south, or the son of my old age, because he was old at this time. Benjamin was the last of the 12 children. So a little bit of difference there. 35:8. What's that? Oh, this is where Deborah, the nurse died, and she was buried at this place called Alan Baku, which is an oak of weeping. So she was buried beneath that oak there. And then verse 14 and 15, this is kind of getting back to where Jacob had been before. Jacob set up a pillar, this is 14, set up a pillar in the place where he'd spoken to him, a pillar of stone, poured a drink offering on it, poured oil on it, and Jacob called the name of the place where God had spoken with him, Bethel. So this is the same place that when he was going up there originally, that he saw the stairway to heaven, and said, "This is the house of God," and called it Bethel there also. So we kind of see this repeat for it. This slide shows some things about, we have that phrase, Rachel weeping for her children, which really isn't in the text here, but we see that later in, boy, this is really tough. Is it Jeremiah? It's 557 BC. Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, there's Jeremiah 31. I think that's where that's coming from. It's also referenced in 1 Samuel 10 and in the New Testament in Hebrews and Matthew, referring back to Herod slaughtering all the babies at the time of Jesus' birth. So Rachel was a really prominent figure amongst the matriarchs, I guess you would say, rather than patriarchs. And this is where she is today. If you go there, did you go to Hebron? Yeah, we didn't go there. It was Palestinian controlled, so only place we got to in Palestine was Bethlehem.
So that exists
would like to
today?
have gone there. Oh yeah.
They really believe that's where she's been.
Well, that's the traditional side. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's in the West Bank. So, in fact, when we went to Bethlehem, our Jewish guide had to get off the bus. A Palestinian guide had to get on the bus to take us into Bethlehem because Jews can't go to Bethlehem. They don't let them do that. So it's kind of tricky politically over there today. So in chapter 36, moving on here, any questions so far about any of that? We're going kind of fast, but trying to beat the clock here.
Question. What did you say Naomi means?
Son, that's the first name that Rachel gave him.
Right.
The son of my vigor, the son of my strength. She was having very vigorous childbirth.
Okay, what did Benjamin mean?
It meant son of my right hand, or son of the south.
Okay.
And the right hand signifies justice and honor and righteousness, all those good things. And also son of my old age, which was true too. Which interestingly, if we get there in the last chapter with Joseph, he also refers to Joseph as the son of his old age, which is really not quite so much because Benjamin was a long time after Joseph. So it's kind of interesting. He uses that same phraseology. So in chapter 36, we have a lot about Esau, and this is kind of closing off the Esau part of the story, moving forward with the Jacob part of the story. And we have really a listing, pretty much a genealogy in 36 of Esau's descendants. And basically what this is telling us is that the people of Esau kind of separated from Jacob's folks and went south and east and settled in what we would call Edom. And remember, Edom and Esau they're interchangeable. Esau was also named Edom. And so you see the Edomites here, and just to the right of that, the Seir Mountains, and that's where Esau himself lived, Mount Seir. So this is kind of the Arabic part of the country, while the Jews are more central in that land, where this is more south and east in that land. Just to remind you, we talked in the very beginning about the different structures. There's a big structure of first 11 chapters being criminal history, and then the rest of the book being patriarchal narratives, which is where we are now. But we also have these different toledotes, and we've seen two of them today. In 31, the first verse in 31 says, "This is the generations of Esau." So that's what this chapter is. And then when we get to 37, verse 2, it's the toledot of Jacob. And that's the last one. This one goes till the end of the book, chapter 50. So there's 10 of these things, 10 of these toledotes, where it says, this is the generation of somebody. And then it takes up from that. So that's kind of the substructure, if you will, to the book. And then this is what we find in 36. There's a little bit of discrepancy between 36 and 28, where there's also some discussion around Esau's wives. So this first one is 36, maybe? Yeah. I'm really on time. There it is. 36. Esau took his wives from the Canaanites, Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, Oholibamah, the daughter of Anan, the son of Zibeon the Hivite, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, the sister of Nebaioth. And that's 36. Back in 26, it says when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. So here we got Ishmael's daughter in 36, but Elon the Hittite's daughter in 26. And then in 28, Esau went to Ishmael and took Mahalath, the daughter of Abraham's son Ishmael, and the sister of Nebaioth to be his wife, in addition to the wives that he had. So there's some incongruency here between the different wives that Esau had, and there's no real good explanation for it other than maybe a scribe got mixed up and wrote the wrong one down. I mean, that could have happened, I suppose. But there isn't really a good way to explain why they are different there in these different places. So, okay, let me just back up. Now, the rest of this book, we're not going to do much with 36, since most of it is just a listing of names of people and stuff. It's genealogies, but there are 6 different sets of genealogies in here. It starts out with the sons, and then it goes to the wives, and then it goes to chieftains, and 3 other listings of groups of people that they're giving. This is basically explaining Esau's family and how they are different than and separated from Jacob. Because from this point on, it's all about Jacob. It's really all about Joseph, which we'll get into, his son. But it's kind of the tearing apart of the Esau and the Jacob story, putting Esau to the side, and now we're going to go forward with Jacob. Yes, Charlie?
Is it like, how many wives did Jacob have? Was it 3?
Jacob had 2 wives and 2 servant girls that were wives.
Okay, so,
Zillah and
okay.
Rachel and Leah were his real wives.
Yeah.
And then he had Bilhah and what was the other one's name? Zilpah. Zilpah, yeah. So he had 4.
Because he had 12, he had 12 sons plus, I mean, he had how many daughters?
12 sons plus a daughter. Yeah. The other thing, I didn't point this out, but in here we get the listing of Ishmael's sons, and Ishmael had 12 also. So Jacob had 12 sons, and Ishmael also had 12 sons. That's something we don't think about a lot. There were 12 tribes of Ishmael, just like there were 12 tribes of Jacob that wound up becoming Israel.
I did notice too that Amalek was one of Esau's that created so much problem on down the line.
And he is not included in the 12 of his sons because his mama Timah was the illegitimate marriage.
Yeah, she was a concubine.
Yeah, she was a concubine, so he was not considered a true son. He was included in the 12 sons of Ishmael. Good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, well, no questions. Let's move on to Joseph. Everybody's seen Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? He got the story. Andrew Lloyd Webber did pretty well with this story. So in chapter 37, I'll just read the beginning here. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. And here's your magic verse, verse 2. These are the generations of Jacob. There's your total. It tells you that now we're starting another section. And it's all about Jacob, and it goes to the end of the book. You know the story. Joseph, being 17, was pasturing the flock. He had brought a bad report back on the brothers, so he's kind of a tattletale. His dad, it's funny how Jacob was a favorite, right? Rebekah loved Jacob, whereas Isaac loved Esau. And now you see that kind of carried forward here in that Joseph is the favorite of Jacob versus all the other brothers. And so you can imagine that they probably didn't feel too good about that. And what we all know, of course, about Jacob in verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of the other of his sons because he was the son of his old age. Not. He was about 60. I guess you can consider that his old age, but he wasn't as old as Benjamin. But I guess for some reason, Jacob felt like, he was the son of his old age. And then he made him a robe of many colors. And here you see it in a couple of different artists' renditions. Now, the interesting thing about this, I think it was maybe American Standard that first came out with this phrase, coat of many colors. And then when the RSV came out, they changed it to a robe with long sleeves. Because we all grew up with coat of many colors, right? Everybody, in fact, Peach even named his painting company coat of many colors, which I thought was pretty creative.
This one just says richly ornamented.
Yeah. Yeah, so the coat of many colors thing is not really clearly in the text. The RSV is probably closer to right when it says long with long sleeves. The only other place, we'll look at this, where this is used, where this word is used to describe this coat of many colors, is 2 Samuel 13:18. And this is... Find 2 Samuel 13:18, and this is talking about Ammon and Tamar. Tamar was the beautiful sister of Absalom. And what verse did I say? 18. Chapter 13, verse 18. Here it goes. Now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So that's the same word in Hebrew as the coat of many colors word over here. Long dress with sleeves. So it was like a princess garment, if you will. I mean, it's still, the whole idea still holds that, it was a very ornate type of dressing, and certainly not something that would have pleased the other brothers very much, that their daddy gave him this and didn't give them anything anywhere near like that. So it clearly demonstrated Jacob's favoritism for Joseph. And so you probably recall the dreams. Joseph came to his brothers, and not real smart at this point in his life. I guess he's a little past 17 here, but he hasn't matured very much because he doesn't realize that, telling them these dreams that they're all going to bow down to him and this stuff is probably not going to go over real well, right? They already don't like him, and now he's just kind of rubbing their nose in it. And so he tells them these two dreams. And the interesting thing about this is that they view dreams a lot different than we do. In fact, we'll look at that a little more in the next slide. But to them, dreams were really important. They were, like Charlie brought up, mechanisms of God communicating to people. And anytime you had two dreams, it meant that it was really going to come true if you had two. So you think about all the people that had two dreams. Pharaoh had two dreams. The butcher and baker had two dreams. Yeah. So when he comes and says, I got two dreams, he's saying this is really going to come true. And they called him a dreamer. I think that's what my translation says, but the real translation there would be something like master of dreams.
Richard, was this God talking to him all the time then through that dream then?
Possibly. It's hard to know if this is directly God's revelation or if it clearly is, plays out over time to be true. So that would suggest maybe so, but it's not like, and God said to him in a dream blank, it's not that clear. So, it could have been just random dream, I guess, that he turned it into this interpretation, but the fact that it does play out over time to be correct tends to make me think that God was probably behind it.
Well, the old and the new, it's very, I'm sorry, it's confusing to me because
It is.
and God is the same, supposed to be the same from the very beginning.
Right.
Yesterday, everlasting,
Right.
Same yesterday and today and forever,
But he does act in different ways. We see him in the Old Testament. He acts in different ways with different people, and usually in a way that they will understand.
But we're descendants from who? Abraham.
Yeah, spiritually we are. Yes.
So
Spiritually, not racially, but spiritually. Unless anybody here is Jewish. Okay, so here's a little bit about dreams. in Hebrew culture, dreams were generally viewed, kind of like Charlie is suggesting, as an encoded revelation of a higher order. In other words, somebody, God, Yahweh, or some deity in Mesopotamia, is communicating through dreams. At least that's what they thought. Stop there. I'm going to take 5 more if that's okay, since we were 5 minutes late starting. Interesting, there's a difference in message dreams and symbolic dreams. So in some of the dreams, there are messages where they see God saying something or hear him telling them something. You don't really have to interpret that because it is what it is, right? But a lot of them, like this, are symbolic dreams where they do require interpretation. So when you see 11 sheaves standing up and bowing down to the 12th sheaf, you have to kind of put a little interpretation to that because it's not real clear just from the dream itself what's going on. And that's kind of what Joseph was doing here. Sometimes dreams were reviewed as a portal to the divine. That was more of an Egyptian thing than a Jewish or Mesopotamian thing. And dreams were interpreted, were valued as prophecy. So they put a lot more. You think about Nebuchadnezzar, the dreams that he had, Daniel had to interpret. They really put a lot of stock. In fact, Nebuchadnezzar, when they couldn't tell him the dreams, they killed them all because they couldn't kill the dreams, but Daniel could. So dreams meant a lot more. We have fun with dreams. I love dreaming. So we have all kinds of crazy dreams, but half the time I don't know what they mean. But to them, it was more than just a fun thing. It was something that really had a lot of serious, important meaning. And there he is. Tell him about his dreams, making him even more mad. Here's the pit that they threw him into. We also have a little bit of discrepancy here between who picked him up, the Ishmaelites or the Midianites, because it says both in different places. And this is where the scholar people kind of get off on the old Japheth thing, the Yahwistic and the priestly and the Elohistic and the other one, different people that have put this together. And they suggest that the Elohist writer put it from Reuben's perspective and said it was Midianites, but the Yahwist writer put it from Judah's perspective and said it was Ishmaelites, and then they kind of crunched them all together and made a mishmash. I don't know if that's really true. I kind of have my doubts about that a little bit. That's how scholars would explain this away. That some places it says Midianites, and maybe there were some Ishmaelites in with the Midianites. I mean, that would be a simple way to reconcile it. Who knows? But we do have that little bit of discrepancy in there. I think that's probably about all that we're going to have time for. Oh, this is where he sold about his brothers into slavery. Same thing here. Oh, this is when they take the coat to Jacob. Obviously, you can imagine poor old Jacob. He loved this guy. They bring him back this coat all drenched in blood from an animal that they killed. And of course, that's a crucial part of the story. He's never really quite the same after this, even until the time that he goes to Egypt and actually sees that Joseph is still alive. And so this is just showing kind of where all this is happening. And they started in Hebron, they went up to Dothan, or at least Joseph went up to Dothan where the guys were herding the sheep, and then he gets captured in the pit and gets taken. This red arrow or red line on the left is what's called the Way of the Sea. It's the main highway, if you will, that goes from Israel down over to Egypt. And that's how he got to Egypt. And we'll start with Tamar next week in chapter 38, since we don't have time to get into that right now. Any questions, comments? I know it's going really, really fast.
My brain is about to slow.
I know. Too much stuff, right? All right. So next week we'll do that, and let's see, 39 through 42. So it's still going to leave us 5 chapters. Hopefully we get through it.